A new era of Texas football set to begin this season as the Longhorns are officially in the SEC, helping us break down the 2024 season. Our good friend CJ Vogel of OnTexasFootball does a fantastic job of talking all things Texas Longhorns. CJ, what's going on, my man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Looking forward to joining a new chapter for Texas here, getting an idea of what the SEC is all about. It's exciting. I'm ready for it. Texas is ready for it. Should be a good season.
And CJ, let me also kick it off by saying it was great meeting you and the crew in
Yeah,
Dallas,
absolutely.
Texas. That was a lot of fun. We got our first taste of what it's going to be like, right? This 16-team SEC, and certainly Texas, I think you could say, stole the show a little bit at the media event there in Dallas. But again, the fun begins in a couple weeks. Before we look ahead, though, CJ, let's look back on the 2023 season, because 2023, right, was really important because you wanted to go into the SEC putting your best foot forward and lay the foundation, if you will, to make a splash in this 2024 year. So Texas, a season ago, goes 12-2, 8-1 in conference, wins the Big 12, loses to Washington in that classic game in the college football playoff semifinals. It literally came down to the final drive there. When Texas fans, and including yourself, look back on the 2023 season, what's the main takeaway? Because it was a really important year going in, right? There were big expectations in 2022, didn't quite meet them. And it kind of felt like last year, dare I say this, CJ, last year was the year where Texas kind of got back, if you will, to being the Texas that we expected. But when you look back on 2023, biggest takeaways, and how does the fan base look back on the final year in the Big 12?
Yeah, it's been, kind of a running joke for the last 10, 12 years, whatever, but it does feel like Texas is back to where the expectations meet the reality that you see on the football field, right? That year 3 leap for Steve Sarkeesian that we saw in Austin, it's what Tom Herman failed to do. It's what Charlie Strong failed to do. And it's that continual improvement from year 1 to 2 to 3. And obviously going into year 4, those expectations are very high. I believe they were just number 4 in the coaches poll. AP poll comes out next week. They're expecting a top 5, landing spot there as well. But to go from 5-7 year 1 to 8-5 year 2, and then again to see that continual improvement on the field in recruiting, just an overall cultural improvement as well. Sarkeesian feels like the right guy for the job, and everything that he's proven so far at Texas leads me to think that he is the right guy for the job. And again, with the trajectory that it's currently headed on right now, Texas, very high expectations, but they also understand that this is a new kind of world for them to jump into in the SEC. It's no longer going to be the Iowa States, the Kansas States, the Baylors of the world. It's going to be an improvement in terms of strength of schedule. But I think that they have a solid enough talent, depth chart right now to compete with just about anybody.
CJ, you mentioned Steve Sarkeesian. That's where I want to go next, entering his 4th season. And like you mentioned, the trajectory of the program, where Texas is currently at. So I feel like this will be a pretty simple answer for you. But what's the overall vibe amongst Texas fans regarding Steve Sarkeesian and his standing there at Texas? Again, this is a guy that, did he turn it down? Did he not? Most think he did. But either way, it's still a good look to say that you did. Turn down the Bama job. Again, you look at the past couple years, the trajectory made the year 3 leap. Like you mentioned, there's other coaches that did not do that. So I would imagine the approval rating for Steve Sarkeesian there in Austin's pretty high going into year 4.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I have to believe that every Texas fan is on board with him and what his future is. Obviously, the Texas Athletics Department is very much locked in. He just signed that extension that carries him all the way through 2029. So they think that this is their long-term solution. And again, why would you not? You've seen that improvement from each year. Texas fans, to have that, season of, oh, this might be something pretty special going on right now after being 5-7 2 years ago. They see the improvement, and again, they've bought all the way into Steve Sarkeesian. He's a great representative for the university. When you speak to him at these pressers, these media availabilities, it's a genuine approach. And I think folks who kind of got to sit back and watch him for the first time at SEC Media Days in Dallas, when he had that 10, 12-minute monologue up there, you got to see the charisma a little bit of Steve Sarkeesian. And yeah, I think there's some confidence there. It might teeter over a little bit at times, but that there's a reason for that. And again, I think that trickles down into the identity of his program as well.
So, CJ, diving into this 2024 Longhorns team, let's start on the offensive side of the football. Of course, most notably, Quinn Ewers is back as QB1. That was a huge announcement when he made that just a couple months ago, announcing, I'm coming back to Texas to finish what I started. He's probably got the most popular backup quarterback in the country behind him in Arch Manning. And, most would argue, and I would agree, it's the best quarterback room in the country when you have those two guys. But either way, Quinn Ewers, the clear-cut number one. You got to replace a plethora of production: Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington, Jatavion Sanders, Jonathan Brooks. Yeah. But you did add a lot of guys from the portal: Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden, Amari Nyblack, just to name a few. Jadon Blue, CJ Baxter, they're going to man that thing in the backfield. They do return. Gunnar Helms and Juan Davis provide you experience at the tight end spot. And most notably, maybe on the offense, CJ, 4 of 5 starters turning the offensive line, and it's anchored by Kelvin Banks Jr., one of the best in the country. Again, this was a dynamic Texas offense last year. Like I mentioned, you got to replace a lot, but with what you added, CJ, I'd imagine that the expectation there, especially again with Steve Sarkeesian manning the controls, Kyle Flood there as OC, the expectation is to have one of the best offenses in the country yet again.
Yeah, they're expecting it. It's crazy to say an offense that lost the fastest man to ever appear in the NFL Combine, and A.D. Mitchell, who still ran in the mid-4.3s, is expecting to get faster, and yet that's kind of the word that we're receiving out of Austin right now. It's very bizarre, and I'm not sure if I 100% believe it yet. But again, that's what we've heard dating back to the spring into summer and now into fall camp is they're expecting to be faster at every position. And I think they say that because obviously Xavier Worthy, A.D. Mitchell, those guys were great. Maybe you didn't see that top-end speed from Mitchell all too much during the 2023 season. But when you look at the pieces that will be on the field from, wide receiver 1 down to tight end 2 to 3, there's a lot of speed. It's Silas Bolden coming from Oregon State. It's Isaiah Bond from Alabama. Jonte Cook, a former, borderline 4 or 5-star guy out of DeSoto, Texas, expected to make that leap. And the guy probably stealing the show in all of this is a 5-star freshman, Ryan Wingo, out of St. Louis. And everything so far about Ryan Wingo leads me to think he might just be the most talented overall Texas wide receiver that they've had since Roy Williams. And that says quite a bit. Texas doesn't have a lengthy history at the wide receiver spot, but right now the early returns are that they've got something special with Ryan Wingo on campus at the moment. Jaden Blue and CJ Baxter, a great 1-2 punch. The secret kind of under the radar guy is going to be Amari Nyblack, kind of a vertical threat down the field at the tight end spot. He's going to be much quicker and faster vertically than what you saw with Jatavion Sanders. The thing I see with the tight end spot that could unlock a little bit more in the Texas offense is, will there be a plus blocker amongst that group? Jatavion Sanders, for all as good as he was in the passing game, never truly bought into the physicalness of playing in the trenches. If Texas can get a little bit more out of that group, I think that's the one area I'm looking at saying, oh, maybe it's holding back just a bit there.
CJ, before we get off the offense, I'll ask you this question. What do you feel? Because a lot of folks, Quinn Ewers is ranked in the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks at minimum in the SEC, but there's some that do ask, what's his signature moment, or maybe try to poke holes in the resume. What do you feel like Quinn Ewers needs to do to take that next step and prove what little doubters he has left wrong?
Yeah, it's been a fun conversation this offseason, right? You look at the NFL draft and you think, oh, they just had 5 position players drafted in that offense. What was going on in games in which they maybe were struggling a little bit, and all eyes went to Quinn. It's fair. For Quinn, to me, it's about playing up to that Heisman level expectation, right? He's right there with Carson Beck in terms of, the preseason favorites for the trophy. Well, if you're going to win that trophy and be in consideration, you have to be a guy in which you can put on the cape and go out and single-handedly win games, right? We've seen it with every Heisman winner over the last few years. They take over football games and do things on the field that no one else can do. And if you're Quinn Ewers looking for that next basically rung on the ladder in terms of what you can do on the football field, it is just that. There were 5 games a year ago where he only had 1 passing touchdown. And you're sitting there thinking, we're playing Wyoming. It's a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. What's going on here, right? Mm-hmm. That has to be the next step for Quinn Ewers, is taking over ball games, taking over in command of the offense which has been another big development for him, is leadership and being that vocal voice in huddles around the locker room, in that kind of cultural dynamic at the University of Texas. He's done good so far going into fall camp, so we'll see if that carries on, but it's all about taking over and control of ball games, in which you look back and say, that was, without question, the best football player on the field this year was Quinn Ewers. Well, that remains to be seen right now.
CJ, let's go to the defensive side of the football because there's a ton to replace there as well, specifically on that interior defensive line, run defense, T'Vondre Sweat, Byron Murphy, Jalen Ford as well. And also, you lose your defensive line coach in Bo Davis as he goes to LSU. But Barron Sorrell returns to the Jack. He's a fantastic player. Anthony Hill Jr. sliding over, I believe, to that middle linebacker spot, building off that freshman All-American season he had last year. You do pick up Andrew Makuba in the secondary from Clemson, who was a really good player there. Jahdae Barron returns at the nickelback as well. When you look at this defense, I feel like this is the bigger question mark, CJ, for this Texas team. I look specifically at the secondary. I mean, listen, I think too many people probably made a lot of, they're throwing it all over the place in the spring game. Look how bad. I mean, it's a spring game. Either way, though, there are questions there. And then interior defensive line. And again, losing Bo Davis, is there an impact there? So when you look at this side of the ball, what do you see for Texas defensively in 2024?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bit of a flip from what you saw in 2023. Last year, Texas, obviously, I think they had the best interior defensive line duo of any team in the country. And they reaped the rewards of that, right? That's T'Vondre Sweat, that was Byron Murphy. Those two guys, you couldn't run against Texas. And that really helped kind of establish the one-dimensional approach to beating Texas, and that was through the air. This year, the difference is, do they have the stallions up in the front like they had with Sweat and Murphy? Because there's a lot of horses in the stable. There's 5 guys, 3 of which they added out of the transfer portal. There's 2 returning guys, Vernon Broughton, and that's Alfred Collins. Who takes that next step? Who's on the field in those 3rd and 4th downs that are critical to getting off the field? That remains a bit of a question mark. However, the big Achilles heel a year ago was playing when you played a team like Washington or Oklahoma, the 2 teams that defeated Texas. Could you stop them through the air? Were those big plays, that chunk plays down the field, were you able to get passes on the ground or intercepted? And Texas just didn't have that in them. I think that they're quicker in the secondary this year. I think they have a better pass rush this year, especially when you add Trey Moore at a UTSA with 22.5 sacks over the last 2 years. That's a guy already taking first-team snaps opposite of Barron Sorrell. So that's the duo that you're going to be running out right now. I'm not sure if that run defense is going to be up to standard that we saw a year ago. But I think when you kind of play that complementary football game with Steve Sarkeesian's offense, you take a defense that is more suited to play against the pass than you do the run. Because if you do get up 20 points, as we saw 3 times a year ago, and you lose those leads, well, I think now you'd rather have that secondary be tip-top point than your interior defensive line, because what are teams going to do? They're going to abandon the run and start hawking it all over the field.
CJ, let's move to the special teams. Let's have some fun with this, talk some specialists. Bert Auburn is back at kicker, one of the best in the country. He was 20 of 21 on field goals a season ago. True freshman Michael Kern taking over at the punter spot. And then you've got dynamic options in the return game with guys like Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, Jonte Cook, like you mentioned. Again, special teams is one of those things that virtually everyone I talk to, they kind of smile or laugh when we get to this point, because it's something that's virtually glossed over, right? There aren't many folks getting asked about special teams in Dallas, but when you're trying to win a national championship, it can be a big difference maker at times in winning or losing ball games. Anything notable in your mind when it comes to Texas on the special teams side of things this year?
Yeah, Xavier Worthy was a tremendous punt returner a year ago. It's interesting. He was actually asked, when did you start to realize you were a good punt returner? He goes, well, I was actually terrified to do it in high school, so I didn't. It wasn't until Jeff Banks, special teams coordinator, said, no. We're using that speed back deep, and we're going to, kind of create some big plays there. Texas is going to replace that with Silas Bolden. He was out of Oregon State a year ago, came in via the transfer portal. Experienced guy's going to be a 5th-year senior this year. Very talented. He was nicknamed the Beaver Joystick whenever he's up in Oregon State. He's only about 5'8", 5'9", but you watch him kind of move with the ball in his hands. He's electric in that sense. One of those kind of juke bugs, if you will, whenever it comes to moving with the rock. Matthew Golden had 2 return touchdowns at Houston on 9 attempts in the kickoff side of things. So I think right now he's kind of that leader in the clubhouse to be the number 1 option there. Jaden Blue, another guy who Real Analytics actually tweeted out he's the 2nd fastest ball carrier in all of 2023, creeping up on 23 miles an hour with the ball in his hands. So if you can have that type of speed and electric, kind of return ability, things shape up well in that regard. Burt Auburn had the most field goals made of any kicker in 2023. I think Texas fans would tell you they hope that's not the case this year, right? They like to convert those into touchdowns a little bit more often. But red zone was a bit of an issue last year as well. But the big question mark here, special teams wise, is Michael Kern, the true freshman out of St. Thomas Aquinas, going to be the punting option to begin the year? Texas doesn't have punting experience on the roster at the moment, but they opted also not to go out in the portal to add somebody. So to me, that tells me that they're pretty confident in what they're bringing in with Michael Kern or an Ian Ratliff, who is the backup punter right now. So that'll be interesting. One of the areas in which I would say is a true question mark entering the season for Texas.
So, CJ, 10 starters return for the Longhorns this year, 5 on offense, 5 on defense. We've talked about already the transfer portal talent that's been added, the true freshman talent. As we look at the 2024 schedule, Texas's first SEC slate, I'm going to run through this here. You open up in the non-conference with Colorado State, week 2 at Michigan. Interesting game, a little tricky. In the big house, they've replaced everyone. It'll be interesting to see what that Connor Stallions documentary says. Kind of a side note. Either way, though, that game in the big house will be fun. UTSA, ULM, open SEC play against Mississippi State. You've got a bye week. Then you've got Red River. I know Texas will be looking for revenge in that one. The home game against Georgia, going to be massive at Vanderbilt, Florida, at Arkansas, Kentucky, at Texas A&M to close out the season. CJ, when you look at that first SEC slate and you look at Texas's schedule as a whole, and I feel like I know where you're going to go here, but what jumps out to you specifically in regards to what Texas drew in this campaign?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty favorable initial SEC schedule, right? I know you play Georgia, but you got them at home. You only have 3 true road games, right? The SEC still has the 4 home, 4 away games. One of your away games this year is in Dallas, in which it's always going to be in Dallas against Oklahoma. So there's one true SEC environment that you don't necessarily have to jump in and play right away. Your biggest game of the year, Georgia at home, again, is at DKR, will likely be under the light, so you'll have that home field advantage. But those last 3 weeks of the year are going to be really interesting to me, right? You go to Arkansas, you go to College Station. Those are going to be 2 big-time games in which you can bet your bottom dollar. Fans in Fayetteville, fans in College Station, that ticket's going to be pretty pricey to get in, and those fans are going to be very excited to see Texas play, their programs. And you can go back to 2021, Sarkeesian's first year. Arkansas whooped Texas. That was not a team that had the physicality to compete in the SEC. This year, I think that they have that in their program at the moment. So, yeah, Sarkeesian will be pointing to that 21 game as, we can't let that slide again. Let's go out, show them, Texas football. Let's do all that jazz. But that Texas A&M game, that to me will be the most anticipated football game of the entire season. And I say that knowing Texas plays the defending national champions, knowing that they will likely play the number 1 team in the country, Georgia, at home, get the revenge against Oklahoma. That's all on the checklist. But that rivalry with A&M, I think some folks maybe don't understand how much of a rivalry it truly is. To get that off of Twitter and off of the social media forums and onto the field again, I cannot wait. That's going to be as electric an environment I've ever seen, probably going into College Station. That's the number 1 takeaway for me is I'm so happy that game's back. To finally declare a winner, to finally get off the timelines and back on the gridiron, that'll be a lot of fun.
So, CJ, I'm going to ask you the question that everybody wants to know, and you can answer this with as short an answer, as long an answer you want. Is Texas ready for the SEC?
Oh, that is the heavy question, huh?
That's what everybody wants to know, right?
Yeah. No, and it's fair to ask, right? You played some tight games in the Big 12. You're not going to be seeing that same level of talent. In fact, you're going to be seeing an increase in talent on a week to week, especially in the trenches. I still lean yes. I think that they will be ready. And I'm not saying they're going to come in and win the conference right away, but they'll compete for a spot in Atlanta by the end of the year. I believe that 100%. The trenches is really where Sarkeesian had to go to get his program ready for the SEC. And I believe he's done just that. Texas has a wealth of experience on that offensive line. You mentioned 4 to 5 returning. The fifth, Cam Williams, all 6'5", 360 pounds of them, had a top 25 start a year ago against Kansas State. So he's got plenty of, starting experience, spot starts experience, but that offensive line is expected to be in the conversation for the Joe Moore Award this year. There's a lot of confidence right now, headlined by Kelvin Banks and Jake Majors, obviously, as well. The defensive line is going to be the big question mark. They're going to have the speed. They're going to have the experience at every position. The defensive line is where I think you win and lose big-time football games, whether it be a Michigan, whether it be a Georgia, or later on against maybe a Kentucky or Texas A&M teams that will look to ground and pound a little bit and own that time of possession. If that defensive line, with all of the experience that they have 5 bodies right now that have played over 400 snaps in their career. If those guys can find a way to be a plus this year, Texas will be certainly in the conversation for another playoff appearance and in the conversation for an SEC championship game berth. Until I know what that defensive line looks like, that's going to be, again, one of those kind of question marks entering the season for how high of a ceiling they truly will have.
So, CJ, on that note, I'll ask you this. In your mind, because I think the expectations, I'm not going to ask you what they are. I think they're pretty clear-cut, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Be in the SEC championship game, make the playoff, and compete for, if not win, a national championship. So if Texas is going to take that next step, win a national championship, which, again, that's not far-fetched at all. There are many projections out there. People have them playing, let's say, an Ohio State or a Georgia or whatever in the national title game. Some may have Texas winning the national title. If the Longhorns are going to do that, in your mind, what has to click for Texas for that to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a red zone offense. That was a big Achilles heel a year ago for Texas. You can point to both of their losses and say that drive, that possession, that red zone trip that did not result in a touchdown was exactly why Texas ended up falling in those games. And for Oklahoma, the Oklahoma game, I mean, it's getting to the 1 yard line, 1st and goal from the 1. You have 4 cracks to punch the ball in. You go heavy jumbo set 3 straight times. You can't gain a yard. What do you do next? You throw to 160-pound Xavier Worthy on a quick screen, and you're tackled at the 1. Well, that's 7 points that you lose the game by 4 you would have liked to have had. Against Washington, what do? They get to the 11-yard line. They got 4 cracks at it with under 15, 20 seconds left in the game, and you don't have a single good look, really, at the end zone. It's punching in on those opportunities. Again, I mentioned Burt Auburn, the kicker, attempted more kicks than any other kicker in the country. Well, Texas can move the football. They have the horses to get down the field. It's going to be up to Steve Sarkeesian. It's going to be up to Quinn Ewers to take that leap from getting inside the 20 to getting inside the end zone. And right now, that was the big Achilles heel a year ago. If they can overcome that and find a way to punch, 3 into 6 and then 6 into 7, that's really where you're going to start to see them, kind of distance themselves from opponents in ball games.
CJ, finally, I can't get you out of here without you having you expand on that Texas A&M game. You mentioned, I mean, that's probably going to be the hottest ticket in college football this year, probably one of the most raucous atmospheres we've seen. We haven't had this game in so long. Like you mentioned, it's been living on the timelines forever. Just if you could just expand, because there might be some folks tuned in who maybe they don't know or they've forgotten the hatred and the vitriol. And we got, CJ, kind of a taste of it about a month or so ago when Jim Schlossnagle went from College Station to Austin. That gave us kind of a taste, but I mean, can you put into words? And we even heard, who was it that said at SEC Media Days that I think it was, did Quinn say it maybe, that the game against Texas A&M, he said his dad said that game against A&M is bigger than Red River, and there was some, chatter about that, maybe some disagreement, but the bottom line is it is a massive game and it is hate-filled. And that's one that I know Texas is expected to win, but that one is massively important coming in because A&M's been talking this SEC smack for over a decade. I know Texas wants to come and put the foot down and say, hey, we've arrived and walk in your trap, take over your trap type of vibe. So give people an idea just what this rivalry really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to call a team a rival, to not like them. It's another thing when both teams are in, kind of the war hymn and the fight song of each other's school, right? What does Texas say whenever they sing the fight song? Well, it's goodbye to A&M. That's, really where the hatred began, and 100 plus years ago, essentially, to have that game return. And it's more than just, two schools fighting in my eyes. When you live in the state of Texas, there are two state programs that stand out when it comes to football, right? That's Texas and that's Texas A&M. That game being on Thanksgiving for as long as it was divided households, sharing Thanksgiving meals, sitting around the couches, kind of just hanging out for that night, supposed to be about food, family, and football. And then it turns into 7 o'clock kickoff comes. We're not family anymore. We're Longhorns or we're Aggies. So to grow up in the state of Texas and to see, 15 years, 14 years in which that game was not played, it sucked. You would drive down any street in any major metroplex in the state of Texas and see Aggie and Longhorn signs in front yards, in houses, the signs, the flags, everything. So for that game to come back, so much history will be, kind of revitalized again. It's going to be a really special evening. And, we always say anything can happen in Dallas with the Texas and Oklahoma games. Whoever's favored, you always see teams kind of elevate their play regardless. More times than not in the last 15 years, it's been Texas. That was the down team. I think this year with Texas and A&M kind of being a home and home once again, you're really going to look at that game and say, yeah, whoever has the home field advantage in this game is going to be the team you could put a dollar or two on and feel pretty confident about, regardless of spread, regardless of who's expected to compete for a playoff spot, regardless of talent or position on the stadium. Those environments and kind of get up for that game is going to be very special, 100%.
CJ Vogel of OnTexasFootball again does a fantastic job covering all things Longhorns, and also is a great talent on TikTok, I found out today, checking out CJ's TikTok. No, CJ, again, you guys do a great job, man. Great to meet you in Dallas. Let folks know where they can check out all of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at CJVogel_OTF or at OnTexasFootball.com.
CJ, you're the man. I appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely. Looking forward to having you down in Austin this year.